The date January 7, 1966 marked a major turning point for the African American communities in the city of Chicago. The Chicago Freedom Movement created demonstrations and protests leading to the end of segregation in housing, education, and employment for the African American people. In early January of 1966, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. moved into a deserted apartment in the west side of Chicago to convey his commitment in ending slums in Chicago. Throughout this time, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. hosted multiple marches and speeches through dominant African American neighborhoods, intended to spread awareness of the constant outrageous housing discrimination and segregation against the Black community. On July 10, 1966, Martin Luther King held a rally at Chicago Soldier Field. On average, 35,000 activists and members of the community attended. After that rally, Dr. King led a humongous group of approximately 5,000 people to the Chicago City Hall, where he presented a list of demands to make Chicago a more open and non-segregated city for the Black community. After previous marches and rallies, Martin Luther King came up with the idea of setting up the next march in the community of Cicero, a community of approximately 70,000 white, higher-class residents. Martin Luther announced, "Not only are we going to walk in Cicero, we're going to work in Cicero, and we're going to live in Cicero." Fearing the possibility of violence against both races, Cicero's town attorney of Chicago sent an urgent meeting to the civil rights leaders about postponing the march until further notice. Despite Dr. King's accommodations to postponing the march, a group of about 2,000 activists continued to march on Cicero over Labor Day weekend in the summer of 1966.
Equality in housing and employment, the civil rights movement began to encounter increased resistance, the so-called white backlash. During these marches, King and other demonstrators were struck by bricks and bottles.
I've been hit so many times, I'm immune to it.
How do you feel about this reception?
Well, this is a terrible thing. I've been in many demonstrations all across the South, but I can say that I have never seen, even in Mississippi and Alabama, mobs as hostile and as hate-filled as I've seen here in Chicago.
The march will go on anyway?
Oh, very definitely. We can't stop the march. We're going on in a few minutes.
You feel you're in?
Objects such as stones, bricks, and even bottles were thrown at the protesters. It is said that a shocking 2,250 National Guardsmen were called to settle the dispute. In May of 1967, the Leadership Council for Metropolitan Open Communities launched Project Good Neighbor, a massive fair housing education campaign, later influencing the Fair Housing Act of 1968, passed by Congress, an act that prohibited discrimination on basis of race, color, religion, national origin, and gender, creating open housing.